All right, Kanti, let's get started. Kumar, you guys know each other for a long time now. Best of buddies,
Yes.
long time friends. I feel like I'm in the middle of like two seasoned journalists, and I'm like this kid who's trying to learn right now from two of you, all your experience. So it's a privilege. I mean, just to be sitting here with you guys. I wanted to say that up front.
It's it's more like long lost friends actually. We have not been in touch for many years, although we have been doing indirect kind of connections with via our common friends. So
Hmm.
we keep hearing about each other from our common friends, but after a long time we connected.
Okay, you needed a podcast for that, right?
Right.
Okay. All right.
You see, we connected very well when we did, and respect is undying. So we connect, and I think our values are aligned, and therefore, sometimes.
Mm.
I know it better than most people because I have friends from back home from 50 years, and I've been out of home for about 40 years because of forced migration from Kashmir, and haven't let go of those people. And there was a long period of play when we were simply not able to connect because of our circumstances and the politics of hate and everything. But we did hold on to each other in many ways, and I think now the chickens are coming home to roost. Now that everybody, the politics has settled and people are thinking through their own minds and so on. So yeah, I mean, in your whole life, you meet so many people, but then you're only aligned with a few. And very happy to say Kanti is one of them, of course.
Oh, really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kanti sent me your article, which was very powerful. The one on LinkedIn. You talked about diplomacy.
It
Go
has a
ahead.
personal angle to it in the sense that often I am being kind of accused of being too much of a diplomat in my
Hmm.
conversation or negotiation, let's say, in a difficult situation with other people. So you are a diplomat. You are never saying the what needs to be said, and you are never always telling the truth and all that. So, and this topic has been going on in my mind in the sense that is diplomacy really such a bad thing? First of all, and now that we have seen these conflicts after conflicts going on for years, for example, the Ukraine one going on for 5 years, it's the fifth year now, and now we have this long going, obviously, Middle East conflict, but now full-fledged war going on for almost 2 months now. So the other question that came to mind is the diplomacy really dead? Because it doesn't seem that like actually world leaders are engaging in any diplomacy.
It's really funny. Since I wrote that article, which was not too far, back, just about a few weeks back, there is Pakistan that has upended everyone. And if you ask them, they would say certainly not. Diplomacy is
Mm.
well and alive. And so it's really really funny. And I mean, if you are a cynic and you take the darkest view of diplomacy, you go back to the early, treatises of Chanakya Niti and so on. I mean, it has been a way to kind of broker temporary peace, and it's been with us for a very very long time. In the way and the shape and form that it has assumed globally, especially in the post-colonial world, uh, which also coincides with the end of the second big war. Um, it has had a very Western connotation, and
Mm.
the sad part is that Western way of diplomacy uh, is kind of very frayed and strained, in my view. And I mean, before we, you might have other things to say, but am just giving you my initial sense of this. Uh, I personally feel that the imperatives of of setting up multilateral institutions, or this big talking shop called the UN, at least, was to create a space where people could come and talk with
Exactly.
each other and not at each other and so on. So initially that must have, and then there was this big impulse about no more war, at least among the big powers at that time. So I think even today, in many ways, in many implicit world, in many implicit ways, even if 4/5 of the world might feel diplomacy is dead and doesn't help anyone. I mean, look at all the humanitarian disasters around the world, and you will see, I mean, how effete and powerless the UN is. And yet, there has not been so far a big war. I mean, and so in a way, I mean, the Curtain has collapsed, the Cold War is over. There is no overt war between the big powers. So, in that way, it has served those big competing powers extremely well. But the same
Mm.
competing powers, I mean, the problem with diplomacy also has arisen because of the fact that those big powers have become bigger and bigger, and therefore, structurally, there has been very little collaboration and much more competition between these powers. So competition has kept them from
Hmm.
really uh, so you could argue, is it the right framing? Are we saying diplomacy is dead, or are we talking about visionary leadership, which is probably dead, enlightened self-interest, which might be dead, or something? But I think that is my sense, that it's really not dead, and we can look at it as we carry
Yeah.
forward this conversation in many ways. But yeah, I think it is deeply strained, and a lot of people, at least living in the part of the world from where you and I and Kanti come from, do feel very, very, very disappointed with the way the world is at the moment, and everybody seems to be powerless in front of a few people, and there's no interest in, actually, I mean, it's so naked and brazen, the this brazen, naked pursuit of self-interest
Mm.
uh, at the
Yeah.
expense of.
You do talk about the death of visionary leadership in your article, which you just mentioned. But before we actually, I have a few questions about your article and
Yeah.
want to
Yes.
pick your brains on that. But before that, we didn't actually introduce you to our viewers properly. So just to tell our viewers that Kumar has worked in the UN for many, many years, and especially he has a lot of field experience in conflict-ridden areas like Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq, Fiji, Syria, and Yemen, right,
Yeah.
Kumar?
Yeah.
So, and across various UN agencies like UNDP, UNICEF, WHO, and UN Women.
Mm.
So, before that, he has also been a journalist working in various newspapers and TV channels. So, and he has also authored a book on conflict and communication. And so, he's one of those people who has seen conflict and
Close and upfront.
diplomacy
Upfront.
close up
Close.
front on the ground, yes.
Mm.
So so basically in that context, Kumar, uh, you have seen seen conflict from a very close quarters, and you have also seen how they are kind of addressed at the ground level. So my initial question would be, has the world genuinely now lost the ability to talk its way out of conflict?
Well, I think I, uh, I think we, if anything, I would say, Kanti, that institutionally, if you look at it, I mean, we have only mastered. Look at the whole array of UN political missions around the world, for example. Then you look at the whole bilateral bureaucracies, and how big and bloated they've been, and all these big post colonial powers have been pulling their weight primarily through a very large presence in many of these countries of the global south, and that presence is intelligence, security, economic, and commercial, and political, and cultural, and so on. So there's not a field of human endeavor.
Mm,
They've not kind of, if you excuse me saying this, infiltrated in many, many ways. diplomacy over the years has probably transformed, and has taken many different shapes. But the elephant in the room, to my mind, is uh, mm, diplomacy is a lesser evil. I think the bigger problem is uh, a whole country that depends, or a whole power that depends on a war economy, on conflict, and arms, and look at all these big
mm,
powers. I mean, who talks about how do the human development indices stack up in a big power like America today? I mean, to me, it's a matter of some shame that a country as rich as America would still have visible development deficits. And I mean, it doesn't seem to be a big deal, because we- in capitalism, everything goes, and everything is self-correcting, and things will find their own. But I mean, that administration, every successive administration ought to be thinking about that first. So it's a very perverse, situation where people in the global south, who are chronically, always, because of corruption and lack of resources and so on, chronically underfunding their basic agendas of survival and development of ordinary human beings. In other parts of the world, there's just so much more being spent on other things. And seemingly, on the surface, you might think that they're a very
mm.
transparent democracy. But that transparency, in fact, turns out is only transparency in I mean, it's definitely, there's freedom of speech and so on, and freedom of information. But where is the accountability in that system? So
And
mm,
then all that power they have, all the influence
yeah,
they have, all the wherewithal they have is spent on basically the war economy, let's say. And you
correct,
do talk
exactly.
about forever wars kind of in your
Mm,
article. So I just want to read out a little bit from your article where you mention that, and want to understand from you what you mean by that.
yeah.
So you say that, and I'm reading from your article, if Iran needs to emerge from the crucible of violence, it must do so in defiance of a global system that has become a factory for forever wars. So, what is your thought behind that?
Well, and I keep thinking about how we are fed. Even sitting in that library where I do go every day, most of the information that comes to me is from Western sources. So, for better or worse, even I enjoy reading the Atlantic and New Yorker and so on and so forth. And somehow there is some rigor there, and one likes it. Having said that, there is also a certain insidious information imperialism implicit in that
Mm,
consumption. It's like, we all like to have Chinese and Western and Mediterranean food, but we have almost forgotten that there's also Tamil and Odia and Kashmiri food to have. It's just not available in the same volumes, or in the same, it doesn't have the same presence. And I feel that 47 years of political isolation from the world. And what is that isolation about? That isolation is about nationalization of oil in that country, where there was, somebody decided back
mm,
in the 60s that I don't want Exxons of the world, and I don't want Chevrons of the world, and I don't want these companies to come and take away profits from my crude. I'd rather not have them. So, and then one thing leads to another, and then this very chic, nice, black tie democracy, which is now in the hands of an orange man, decides to manipulate the whole global opinion through this very large information system that I explained to you just a little while back. Because that information system then covers up for the sins that you and I so innocently overlook. And so today, if that country is, and I hold absolutely no brief for Iran, what I'm saying is
mm,
that that country, if you have put it into a corner by literally ruling them out of all international financial systems and so on, they can't buy and sell, and everything has to be kind of clandestine in very inventive, difficult ways. How does that country survive? It's a 5,000-year-old civilization, and is it on anybody's mind that this is a country worth our respect? You know, and but it's only, I mean, as Kissinger would say, these short-sighted politicians only think in terms of election cycles and so on. So it's only about what is in it for us? How can we grab? And Venezuela is, is the latest, the
Yes.
most stark example of that.
One of the big slogans of globalization of trade and globalization of information was that everything would be easily accessible for everyone in a more equitable kind of form. So we are not leaving anyone behind. We are not leaving the global south behind. We are taking everybody along, and so let's all become part of this global market and global economy and everything. But it seems to be the trend is completely kind of reversed in a very
Exactly.
obnoxious way in a way. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, globalization, to the extent that it allowed transnational corporations to come and sell, and to some extent, expand the pie within these countries, because they came with investments and so on. For some time, it seemed like, it seemed a slightly improved version of the trickle down that was already happening in our countries. So we had a slightly bigger trickle down because a few more people got into this net of, exactly the kind of things that are happening to the gig economy right now. And but it was always managed. The profits were always going there. It wasn't as if we were getting, I mean, there have been other revolutions like the digital infrastructure and so on, I would say, have been a bit more in a way emancipating. And I was listening to you two yesterday talking about digitization of economy and how that helped, and you were trying to hold your ground on how bad demonetization was, and I completely agree with you. I mean, look at the number of times they changed the problem is, I mean, Shri is right to the extent that we have to look at both sides. And if you give these crooks a free pass, you might just feel, and I'm talking about the politicians in India right now, you might
Hmm.
feel for a moment that, oh, yes, it's not a good thing that our 85% of our economy is not formalized. So, yeah, very good idea. In this process, we can get a lot of people who can have bank accounts, and then at least this trickle down can be more
Mm.
targeted. At least there will be less pilferage, and at least money can go to some bank accounts and so on. Of course, that 15 lakh didn't materialize, but it is fundamentally a modern idea. It's a good idea to formalize that economy, but there's blood on the floor all the time because it was ill intentioned. You look at
Hmm.
all those accounts, Shri, that have been opened, most of them are today defunct. My
Wow.
wife, who is a small time banker in India, has had to break her back for
Hmm.
days and weeks on end to get these poorest of the poor to have their accounts opened in that bank. And this is the most untold story of
Wow.
demonetization and called digitalization. So many bankers, banking staff committed suicide in this country at the height of that time, and not many people know about it because there is not much juice in that story. The media in India, in any case, is capitulated, which is
Yeah.
our other strand of this discussion, and I
Yeah.
hope we have the time to discuss that as well.
Yeah. They won't send those stories, don't come out, right, until we
Yeah,
can just start digging deeper.
right.
So for me, it was a revelation.
So talking about the domestic situation, Kumar, I just want to uh, kind of ask you, in terms of domestic politics, we are also seeing a very basically any lack of dialogue in our domestic politics. There doesn't seem to be any conversation between the party in power, the government, and the opposition on crucial issues. And we have seen one after another several kind of major changes in the constitutional rules and kind of being passed in parliament without any dialogue, any consultation, any. So is there also a broken kind of diplomacy, diplomatic kind of trend or practice in our domestic politics?
Hmm. So, I think in order for us to address that question, I would say I think we can look at it in two ways. One is to discuss a little bit this election that happened in Hungary just the other day,
Hmm.
because there are interesting lessons. I have put out my initial reflections on how I feel it is so relevant for us right now, because it was a completely institutional capture, and I invite both of you to right after this, if you can, catch this podcast, between this Princeton professor.
Mm-hmm.
I forget her name. Kanti, I'm forgetting the name. With Paul Krugman.
Mm.
It's a 52-minute, extremely insightful conversation, which
Mm.
literally strand by strand exposes the entire working, because she's an academic, and she has looked at Hungary for the last 20 odd years, and she brought so many interesting things to light which I did not know, even though I was so excited about the fact that this useless fellow lost the election. The other guy got a super majority, but it's so resonant that
To
yeah,
come back to something you mentioned in the effort to basically, let's say, finish Nehru's legacy. One of the biggest legacies Nehru left was that non-alignment movement. And we may, at this age, we may actually laugh about that. But if you
yeah,
look back a little bit in the last few years, India has been, in a way, been forced to take a position of willy-nilly, basically, a position of that we are not on this side or that side. And
exactly,
whenever we have sided with one power, we have burnt our fingers, right?
yeah,
So when we are trying to actually finish somebody's legacy, we are actually taking the same strategy in a different name.
right,
So we give it a different name and we
right,
kind of pretend that this is something we are inventing.
right,
And of course, when we talk about non-alignment movement, it was all about diplomacy. It was all about negotiation, all about
right,
uh, getting your kind of similar-minded people together, similar-minded nations together, and make it a
right,
power center to talk to the other power centers and tell
right,
them that we are not with you on certain things. That doesn't mean we are against you,
exactly,
but we want a middle path. But
right,
that seems to be have been lost in this all this
totally.
kind of aggressive postures that world leaders nowadays take,
And
including
that ought to have been Mr. Modi's focus, because now we were certainly at a stage where we could really supply a lot of the needs of the world, and we could really be of some use in terms of technical exchanges. We could be of use even in investments in so many small countries and so on. And so we now had the heft to which was not there when it was just a matter of great idealism for these countries to come together. By the way, Dr. Manmohan Singh himself was leading some big Indian bureaucracy in Geneva way before he became even the Reserve Bank governor, as the head of G77, which was a forum of these transition economies. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot to answer for in terms of how we have sacrificed in this new foreign policy and this new urge to somehow be on the right side of the West and so on. I think there is a lot that we have lost in terms of our medium to long term vision and leadership, because imagine, even if there is a consensus around the reform of the Security Council tomorrow, and countries like India and Brazil actually are allowed a step into the door, uh, we should already be well prepared in terms of what that global South agenda would be and how India would drive it. I mean, there have been, as you know, some reforms in terms of that bank that they set up in China, and some alternative mechanisms and so on. But I mean, not nearly as much as is needed. Or and again, I mean, the risk, in my view, there is that if there is not enough spade work in terms of how diplomacy quietly ought to be functioning in terms of leading that entire global south in very concrete ways, uh, we would be caught napping. In the end, it will be just about, again, I mean, there's this big show about how the Chinese and the Americans stack up, and then there would be about India and China and so on. So there would be, so there's plenty to do. I mean, it would be highly visionary of China and India to come together. I personally think that would be the biggest thing that would happen in this century. If the sooner it happens, the better. With all our very very imperfect experience with democracy, we could be this could be a moment where the Chinese Communist Party
Yeah,
uh, would certainly benefit with this high level kind of
alignment.
partnership,
Yeah, alignment at least, even if it's not a
alignment.
partnership,
Yeah,
because
I mean,
the power is shifting anyway. So this is an opportunity that India and
exactly.
China should utilize because of the fact that nobody's happy with the Western
Mm,
side of things. Europe is already weakened, right? They have no say. Like when we
Right.
talk, when we bring it back to geopolitics and the whole, makeup. What I struggle with listening to both of you is we talk about the nationalistic interests of each country, right? Which is very clear right now. Everybody's got that. Nobody, I feel like, it doesn't seem like they want that level of diplomacy you all have seen in the past. That level of diplomacy that puts UN in the center of it, all that is gone. So
mm,
what I come back to, the question that I keeps coming back to is, where does the UN stand going forward, right? It's so weakened right now. There is no, if you're left to the powers, whether it's Trump, you can blame Trump all day long, but we let that happen. The world let that happen. UN let that happen. Like you can say, from that perspective, that is that is a player that came up because everybody benefited from the US in the past administrations and past, as everything was going good and diplomacy was still a thing that you could come to the table and talk about things. Everybody benefited, but then when as soon as it became, the tables turned with somebody like Trump, now we talk about the fact that diplomacy is lost. I just feel like it's just one of those things that the UN still has to drive, and that's the path is very unclear for me right now. Right, there is nobody to bring anybody to the table. Everybody, including Iran, is left to back. The back channel negotiations are
definitely,
now
yeah,
back channel dealings. Iran and US are
yeah.
right now making a deal as we are speaking. Right?
Each for their own, yeah, each for
Yes.
their own survival or interest. Yeah. I mean,
Shri,
to take a cynical view, UN has been left with the role of being a peacekeeper, like uh, a nation is kind of ruined, and then UN sends its forces to keep peace there rather than peacemaker, right, or peace builder. So it has been left to the, and you refer to that in your article, Kumar, is that basically UN is left with this task of rebuilding ruined nations and civilizations or livelihoods at the very basic level, rather
yeah,
than focusing on the larger kind of global interest and global objective of keeping peace, keeping meaning maintaining peace and making sure that such conflicts and such pain doesn't kind of is not caused to millions of people.
right. So, and I want to take that on, head on, Shri, because I think I don't blame you for not completely getting it, because it is a little bit strange. But here is what I'll tell you. First of all, Trump is not the first one. I mean, we have seen this whole business of UN being chipped away at for a very long time. Vietnam War. If there's a wonderful book that has recently come out. In fact, whatever I'm reading, I will after this send you the links. And there's a wonderful book
It's do, yeah.
by the son of a former UN Secretary General, the Burmese fellow, Utah, Utah's son, or is it the grandson? I can't remember. It is one of the best books that I've written on the UN. I've read on the UN, and it is so profoundly insightful of the time when Johnson was dragging his feet on supporting the UN in bringing peace in Vietnam, and the cost that that particular Secretary General paid. Uh, So and now you see, you if you look at the whole map of the world, if you look at, how many wars and conflicts are literally, getting obsolete literally by weeks. So you have Iran today, and before that there was this horrendous Gaza thing, and before Gaza there was the horrendous Syria thing, and before Syria there was the horrendous Libya, and,
Yeah.
and so on,
And
and
Lebanon is next. Lebanon is coming.
and
Like Lebanon is in disarray already.
Lebanon and Syria is kind of, because they're Siamese twins in many ways, both supported by the erstwhile Russian regime, and uh, they're very similar, and Russians in terms of getting propped by Iran getting propped by Russia, and so there is also a cabal of proxies, which Iran fronts, but then there is China and Russia, behind them, and
Hmm.
and those are the things. That is why we are innocent, because when this orange man changes his mind, your president, every day, he's getting more and more cognizant of what it means, and I'll wipe out this civilization. And then he realized, somebody asked him, oh man, please pause, press the pause button, because China is also listening in, and there are so
Yeah.
many things. I mean, it's not, I mean, Iran couldn't survive a single day without all the hardware, military hardware, and that China
True.
is supplying.
Every country has their own nationalistic interest and their own needs of surviving in this economy and going forward. Again, going back to the fact that UN is nowhere in the picture, right? I mean, that is
Mm,
the view of people like me who does not have that whole background of how the UN did things in the back, or at least just we know it by history to the effect. But then for you all to
See,
have been
the
front
UN
and center,
unfortunately does not have an enforcement mandate. It cannot. It can only be as good as it is made to be. It is a great talk shop. It is a great convening platform. People love to call, because it's not US, it's UN, and so once in a year in September, there's a big jamboree in New York, and the General Assembly meets, and all the heads of state and government representing the whole length and breadth of humanity come and converge in New York, and for days and days there are meetings. So that is the General Assembly. Then there are the side events and so on around women and this and that and so on. So I still feel, and I don't know who had said this, but there was this fantastic adage about the UN. Somebody had said about the UN: the UN was not created to take humanity to heaven; it was created to keep it from going to hell. So,
that's
and that's
nice.
precisely
and
true.
and
So
its supporters
Well,
and
it is
people
going to
who have
hell
been,
though. It is going to hell though.
it is going to hell, yes. But if
It's
you
a
ask
failed.
the supporters and people who believe in UN, still they will tell you that the hell would have been worse if UN didn't exist. So,
exactly, because it'll be a subject of another podcast. Hopefully, we can have one more chat about uh, mm, the blue UN and the black UN, and how much of humanitarian development work all these agencies on the ground have done, and how much of in a way a self-correcting mechanism it has been for a lot of people in the world who have been laboring under dictatorships and so on, and just the sheer presence of the UN, apart from the fact that they bring skills and know-how and technology. I mean, in many countries, it is very, very useful. Sorry for, I had to look at my phone because this morning I stumbled into something, and I thought I'll read it to both of you. And
Sure.
because it is a tweet by a gentleman who apparently is a Norwegian academic, and probably definitely a peacenik and a politician of some sort, but he's a very strong academic. His name is Glenn Deason. Kanti might have heard of him. Anyway, he's saying, we are told that the security in the Middle East requires defeating Iran. Security in East Asia requires defeating China. And security in Europe requires defeating Russia. We never discuss security in terms of how to learn to live together by harmonizing interests and managing competition. Kanti, you and I would write the same thing. This is by design.
mm,
This is hegemonic peace, in which security depends on defeating rivals rather than managing a balance of power.
mm,
Subsequently, security relies solely on deterrence rather than reassurance. Diplomacy is dismissed as diplomacy is dismissed as appeasement. Peace agreements are temporary and deceptive, and war is peace. Our rivals do not have legitimate security concerns, as their policies are allegedly always motivated by aggressive, irrational, or expansionist behavior. We have convinced ourselves that our liberal hegemony is a force for good, and that our opponents oppose our dominance because they reject our benign values of freedom. Discussing the security concerns of adversaries is believed to legitimize their policies, which is treasonous. The world is
mm.
divided into good guys, liberal democracies, and bad guys, autocracies. We should not ask how defeating Russia, as the world's largest nuclear power, is a rational security strategy, or why our governments refuse to even speak with Moscow to discuss the European security architecture and end the war. Our governments have relabeled nuclear deterrence as nuclear blackmail to signal that there can be no more constraints. And the last paragraph: all empires can become irrational during decline. Leaders take greater risks to avoid decline. Legitimacy crises at home must be distracted with enemies abroad. Outdated strategies from a bygone era of strength are still embraced, and there is a tendency to double down on narratives of being indispensable, representing universal values, and dismissing all opposition as illegitimate and dangerous. Are we the fanatics?
Yeah, it's a very powerful thought. Your camera's off, Kumar.
While
Sorry.
you were read, yeah,
Yeah, your camera went
So
off. Yeah.
I just chanced upon it. I'll send it to you, and it was I thought very very powerful. At
Yeah, it
least a
is.
follow.
it is.
It is, and he talks about the empires declining, and that is what the general,
And the
talking point,
constitution
the
is
talking
based
point
on
right now
constitution.
across
Yeah,
all podcasts and main media is the U.S. empire is declining. Right, this is the decline of the
right,
U.S. empire, and it might as well be, and I think it, empires shouldn't be empires. I mean, in the sense we gave U.S. so much of, I guess, say in the whole makeup of this world that it is good in a way that the empire is declining. But what comes next is really the question, right? What comes next? Because everybody, they might not be an empire, but then they all are in a way bad actors in this world.
right.
So the future, just because an empire is declining, just means power just gets distributed, like Iran gets
That's
more
not
power
going to
now,
happen. Yeah.
because of the
Yeah,
Straits of Hormuz. That is also not a positive look either, right? It
right.
is not a positive or something to say, yeah, we might lose the orange man for now, but what comes next across the world is the uncertainty that we, I think, nobody knows right now, right?
See,
Overall, it then comes down to what you laid out, Kumar, is basically the decline of the universal belief in universal values. I mean,
yes,
we were basically becoming more nationalist, more individualistic at a not only at an
right,
individual level, but also
exactly.
national level, country level. So we just want to take care of ourselves, and anybody else who is not in agreement with our ideologies or our policies are basically our adversaries, and we are out to kind
Exactly.
of finish them. So that's the end of any kind of diplomatic kind of
Exactly.
principles. The
Exactly.
basic, I think the basic principles of diplomacy has been lost in the sense that you need to have some kind of, even if you don't agree with your adversary, you need to have some respect, some trust that we could meet halfway there. We can come around the table
Professor,
and talk to. Yeah.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs said pretty much the same thing. I mean, this guy said
Mm.
it in so many words. He said it in one sentence. Just the other day, I was hearing somewhere, he was saying the future of survival of humanity depends on what do we want to do with this big, beautiful document called the UN Charter, which basically is the foundational document for international law.
Yeah.
I think the core principle of multilateralism is your absolutely unconditional belief in international law. That
Mm,
at the moment seems to be trampled completely by one among at least overtly by one person, and maybe one poor person and who represents one of the five great powers. So, and maybe we don't know what is the state of play for as far as the others are concerned, and how much others invested in this. But that's another thing. You see, the dog whistle politics, in a way, if Modi or Trump are seen to be getting away with trampling upon the hopes and aspirations of hundreds of millions of people by not having any faith in international law. I mean, who is going to tell that useless dictator in an African country or in anywhere else? Who is going to civilize
Mm.
the savage in a way?
They're
So,
setting the
in a way,
precedents. Yeah, they're
what
setting the
America
precedents.
did, in a way, set the international compass for the right thing to do. At the moment, we seem to be in that moment where everything goes, and there and I think that is extremely disempowering for a lot of people. That what is going
Let
to
And
happen.
it's all amplified by the fact that we are living in an age of communication, instant communication, social media. I'm sometimes amazed how much Trump actually declares his intentions or kind of dictates through his truth platform,
yeah.
rather than actually talking to the real diplomats or even within his own administration, people who might be doing the backdoor
He doesn't want that.
diplomacy
He doesn't want that. I
negotiations.
see. That's what the speed in which how you can conduct negotiations on Twitter, on X, and these things. You can. They are using the methods available today. I would call it smartness, because they don't want diplomacy. They don't want to go to the Congress. They don't want to sit around and discuss, because diplomacy takes time, right? It takes time. It's a long process.
Mm.
It's not speedy. So the ones who want to disrupt that will go to social media, will go to the tweets to, and so that's what he's done in his second term. He's created chaos. They call him the agent of chaos. Why is that? Because he's created chaos, and nobody can react. Today, after this talk, he would have said something else. Tomorrow, he'll say something else. Diplomacy takes
Right.
time, and and if you talk about the UN Charter, all that meant people come to those meetings, take time,
Spend
sit
out,
around,
spend days
discuss.
and months. Yeah,
There's
all
no
the
See,
all
time.
I
the
think
The
the
actually
UN.
better frame
all,
is not
all
time. I
the
think the better framing is intent. I think diplomacy needs intent,
Mm.
and I was just reminding when you were talking about social media and so on, and I was just reminding myself we did not even cover the AI word, which is the biggest threat. And yesterday I just stumbled on this very long article in one of these American magazines, where I mean, that article, I think it's probably in Time, but it's giving the prognosis about what is the worst that could happen because of AI. And you have all these stalwarts there, including this guy who heads up Anthropic,
Yeah, yeah.
who has
mm,
really gone out on a limb multiple times, saying, in 1 to 5 years, this blue collar employment will be completely wiped out. I mean,
Everybody said
this will
that.
be
Sam Altman said that.
and Altman
Elon
said
Musk.
that, and the Meta guys are saying that, and everybody is saying that. Now, here's the thing. So that's happening right in front of our own eyes. Now, you see, Anthropic and Claude and this whole Maven system. This was the favored thing as far as Pentagon was concerned, and in Maduro's capture,
Capture.
this
They used it. Yeah.
yeah, they use this entire Anthropic technology, right? So right after that, their contracts were cancelled. You know why? Because, as it turns out, and I don't think it's only Anthropic saying it about themselves. The whole industry acknowledges the fact that among these big American AI behemoths, they are the only ones who are way ahead of everybody else in terms of self-regulation and so on. So this guy said, I will sign on every dotted line as far as the Pentagon, whatever they ask me to do in terms of how they want to use the system. But I have two non-negotiables. One is I will not agree to mass surveillance, and second, I will not allow you to use this software on automated weapon systems which are completely without human judgment,
Yeah.
human control. And
Yeah,
then and so I think this the Secretary of War probably read it in a different way. He thought this is some
yeah.
left
They're in
liberal
court right now.
idiot,
Yeah, we canceled all the contracts.
doesn't understand it. He might, we might be in a war situation and suddenly the software will not work. So they immediately gave contract to Altman. So OpenAI does the rest of the contract. And guess what? Within 3 weeks, he realizes that that other guy was saying the right thing, and I might be in a big mess because of this. Because
Mm.
the
Yeah,
Pentagon is not its only client. I mean, they have a million clients. So, Altman also said the same thing, more or less the same thing. So
they are
there is
saying
speed. We're
that.
talking about speed
Yeah,
and Truth Social, which is a travesty. The biggest liar politician on the planet, has a social media platform called Truth Social. So
yeah.
it's
So
social.
here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? I mean, I think Anthropic and Altman and all these people are saying that right now because they're not ready for it yet. If you look at the fine line, they were saying don't use it for mass surveillance, don't use it for all these things. But right after that, the war started. They still
Yes.
did use Anthropic, and they used Maven technology. They
Yeah.
used it still. If you they Anthropic is the one that's at least having a moral code right now. At least that's what it seems like. But just because they're not ready yet, they have no control. They've just released their newest version, which is Mythos. They are
Yeah.
not releasing it because they don't have the control. AI is taking a shape beyond their own control. So I think it's a matter of time that once the regulations are put in place, everything will be usable, right? They are cognizant of the fact that they don't have the ways to control AI's growth right now or put regulations around it. That is why they're saying that. So I think these people will change their tones afterwards. This is just a matter of time. They are right now saying all these things. Looks like they're being cautious and moral, but I don't think it's the moral code. I think it's the readiness factor that is.
I agree, and
Mm.
that is what is, to be fair to these guys. I mean, at least this Amadio fellow, the Anthropic guy, is saying it very clearly that despite all that hype and $1.4 trillion getting into this Bay Area on AI research, I'm saying we are not at a stage where we can
Yeah,
safely predict today where
yeah,
how much self-correcting AI can be.
yeah,
And I mean, we are still
yeah,
developing systems and so on.
yeah.
So,
And they'll be
and
ready.
so
They'll be ready fast, but we will not be ready with governance, whether it is
I agree.
I
What
corporations.
I'm saying is,
Yeah,
see, this AI is the flavor of the season, and this too shall pass, and this is fine, and this is game changing. I agree, and all of that is there. What I'm saying is, Shri, for Christ's sake, as a planet and as a people, we are all in this one crucible. So whether it's a space mission or whether it is AI or whether it is in political visionary leadership, we all ought to be, all the world which has all the resources in the world to fix everything today ought to be focused on that one goal of pushing the boundaries a little bit on inequality, on conflict prevention, on saving the
yeah.
planet, on biodiversity conservation, on climate crisis. We ought to be focused there. How will the world focus on
and
those things when big
saving
data
lives. I mean,
being
the,
uselessly
the
talking
most
about wars?
important thing.
Yeah, see, it's the problem. Like we talked about all these people using social media. I think what UN or whatever governing body that is going to look at this from a more humanitarian perspective need to use the same tools to kind of spread that message. If the bad actors are using it to get to this sort of create chaos, the same tools have to be used by UN. You can't go back to the old methodologies, old frameworks. You have to find new framework, just like Trump is using Truth Social and everybody's using AI for whatever it is to push their agendas, propagandas forward. The good actors should also be smart enough to use the technology and the means to to at least come to the table, because the tables are virtual right now. There are no tables to sit and discuss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You have to
exactly.
discuss it on Twitter or X.
But yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, Raj. But the thing is, it's still at the end of the day, more of a performative kind of communication or negotiation. Yeah. I mean, if you are just relying on, let's say, technology such as social media or AI to communicate your message, well and good, but that doesn't really bring people to even to the virtual table for discussion because it's so amorphous in a way. And also because it's all performative. I mean, what Trump is doing is basically performing on the global stage of his own
Yeah.
kind of whims and wishes, and other people are reacting to that. So when does conversation happen if you are just doing that for the sake of the media, for the sake of the social medias, for the sake of the audience, virtual audience, but not for the real people who you need to talk to? So, can diplomacy really survive in a world where everything is so performative?
You have to be performative, I think, because Jeffrey Sachs, we talked about, he's been talking about what he's talking about forever. Why are we listening to him more now? Because there's chaos. He's not just starting to talk about it right now. His videos are out there. Nobody talks about it when there's nothing's going on. Everybody goes on doing their own thing. You have to continue to be
Yeah,
performative and talk about these things when things are not going. That's what's happening. You got to build up. You got to build up when the going is good, to be prepared to have that performative or whatever stance to
and
oppose.
you see,
Yeah.
Shri, how much distance we have traversed, even in the last few years, from a place where there was a lot of skepticism about the UN in many countries, especially poorer countries and so on, about all these big beautiful cars and offices and so on and UN staff, and people just didn't get it. I mean, what are these jokers doing in our countries? I mean, and that was a very legitimate view, because we were absolutely horrible at actually conveying how this intergovernmental organization
Mm.
supports countries in a million different ways, and that support is completely demand driven, because we exist in these countries at the pleasure of those governments. We are not an NGO, it's not a super NGO, it's an intergovernmental organization, not a non-governmental organization where every government is invested. That said, what I'm saying is the UN has this double crisis at the moment to transcend. One is this chronic underinvestment in the UN in order for it to carry forward even its humanitarian peace building mandate, and the development work that it does in so many transition countries. The other one is its complete political, I mean, lack of legitimacy as a political organization. It Because the big powers who should be invested, I mean, there's this big General Assembly that passes resolutions and they're not enforceable. Nobody bothers about those resolutions.
And
170
also, even for, I mean, I think
in
there is a
Gaza,
found,
it happened in Iran. Every time they convene quickly and they issue these resolutions. But how can we enforce those resolutions when the big competing powers are not even looking at each other? So there is no
and the big
desire.
competing powers have the key to it. And
Yeah,
there is a foundation issue with
correct.
the way UN Security Council is structured is that out of the
Exactly.
five, three have the veto power, and whenever
Yeah.
it suits them, they use that to stall
Yes.
any kind of progress on any resolution, any
Exactly.
enforcement of any international law.
Which is what
So
happened in
it's a
Ukraine for. I mean, Russia never allowed anything to. Yeah. Exactly.
exactly. So that's the big bind that UN is caught in, and unless there is actually a complete kind of rethinking of how the UN should be kind of reformed in
Yes.
terms of its Security Council structure
Yes.
primarily. There is not going to be any solution to this problem.
I mean, even if the UN goes away tomorrow, Kanti, given the fact that the logic and imperatives of these big powers and their own and self-interest has trumped everything else. I mean, even if it were to die tomorrow and something else were to come in its wake, another multilateral forum which is more representative of the large sections of humanity, which at the moment are completely excluded. Uh, I think they will have to upfront decide about whether it's a big trust fund or some trusteeship model where no matter what happens, there's no dearth of resources, that the UN will be met. Yes, we if they all agree that the UN the has the bandwidth to fix the world's problems, not just to advocate, for example, SDGs and so on, but to actually go fix and do
Mm.
things, then they need to have a very durable, very reliable funding architecture to back that up. That's one part of it. Secondly, if the consensus in the world is that we're back to barbaric ages and let's bloody get out of this nonsense about convening around
Each for
political issues and so on, they get
each
out of
for
that
his
business.
own. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, then
Well,
it's a jungle run. We may feel
the,
desperate about that world where we might feel so disappointed that all seem to, whether we understand UN or not, we all seem to fundamentally like the idea of the UN,
yeah, I
that
mean,
there is
there's always a good thing for.
Absolutely.
It's always good to have somebody who's a negotiator or a
neutral. Yeah,
neutral, who talks
yeah.
diplomacy, as long as everybody comes to the table and talk about it, right? Are we too far gone to even the credibility issue is big, right? The US has lost credibility, but even if a more amicable government comes in who's ready to come back to the table, what does that mean anymore, right?
It's never too late to get started on talking to each other, no matter what. So even in the
It's never
past,
too late.
we have
Yeah.
no, it's not never too late because in the past we have seen big conflicts being at least being kind of stalled to some extent through peace agreements, which have taken obviously months and kind of back channel discussions, negotiations. But we have seen those examples, and that's why probably what Kumar said that we haven't really seen a big kind of like third world war kind of a scenario so far because those efforts have been successful even in a limited way. So it's never too late. I mean, sometimes
See
we have
the
come to that precipice, but we have always been able to kind of stall it because through discussion, through conversation. So I don't think, and if it's a calmer administration as you are hoping, and we are hoping
no,
also,
my question is
then
what will UN do, right? I know, you know, it's never too late. Those are like rosy things to say. Like I have a pessimistic view here because nothing's worked when so the frameworks have not worked when it got chaotic, right? So what are you going to do
mhm,
next is really the question, right? For me, from the point about World War III, no, I don't think the big wars are coming. The wars are already happening. It's small wars happening, right? The maybe
mhm,
the World War III is like happening in sprouts, right?
fragments.
The
Yeah,
next one, yeah, the next one will happen, and so that is the world is at war right now, right? Don't call
it
it
is.
World War III if
Yes.
you don't want it, but the world is at war economically, geopolitically. I mean, everywhere across the world, there's conflict. What else are we waiting for? The big world war? I mean, that's my point of view. I'm just wondering what will happen. Like you get an amicable government here, and everything calms down for a little while. What is the UN going to do, or anybody going to do? What are we expecting them to do, right? Because the point is, I mean, what does that look like? Like when the storm is over and we're back to the calm state, that's what I think nobody has a clear picture about, right? When we talk about diplomacy being dead, that is the problem. It's like this situation will change, this will pass, but what's coming next is what
Well,
worries. Yeah.
I mean, the UN is not in some kind of a terminal decline because of Trump. I mean, the UN has been in decline for quite some time. Let's face that. And I mean, Trump just makes a bad situation much, much worse. I mean, and to me, the more precise, the more acute, the more sharp question to ask is how can the world's biggest cradle of democracy save itself from being subverted completely by a man on the loose? And what do I mean? You look at the agenda of tariffs, and you look at the agenda of anti-immigration politics, and you look at what the conflicts and so on. Just about 2 months, 2 months, 3 months ago, the whole world was caught in this paroxysm. Oh, what are the tariffs going to look like? Very punitive, completely undiplomatic, strange kind of economic theory and politics, not borne out by most economists. But of course, there are center right and far right people who have a proper thesis about why this can work and so on. So that said, what I'm saying, Shri, is America benefited so much from its immigrant experience for all these centuries, right? And today you are hounding out people left, right, and center. And meanwhile, even when we concede the fact that he may not be a raving mad white supremacist, it's well known that he's busy repopulating these deadly Africans from South Africa into the
Mm.
US, because they are probably feeling the political heat from the blacks in that country, whom they have subjugated and raped and maimed for 200 years and exploited and so on. So you have this strange specter uh, of a guy completely running roughshod over institutions that have thrived on this whole salad bowl melting pot experience. He himself is a product of that experience. And what did that mean for the world? I mean, we all felt free, we all felt better because you could cross over there. My daughter lives in New York, Kanti's daughter is somewhere else. Our children feel, even middle class tax paying people, when they get too caught up with the politics of the country and so on. I mean, this is our way out. And this is what I used to say, even as a very, even more innocent person back in the day, that 1945 is when the Second World War ended. And is it not strange that from the 50s I know my cousins and uncles who went to Europe for studies, and this is a continent
Mm.
that was decimated, flattened, 60 million people dead in that Second World War, right? And it became aspirational for all of this world to go and study in that continent. How did they rebuild in such a short period of time? What was that consensus that emerged? I'm sure they must have been gunning for each other, even, I mean, and I think those visceral animosities must still be intact, but they created an architecture of world peace. They created a system of international law. They created institutions that survived and thrived and actually, held well for so long. And so that is why I'm saying, with utmost respect, I'm telling you, the issue is not the UN. The issue is the fact that people have stayed their hand from the UN. The big guys who matter had vision. They are the ones who created the UN in the first place.
Yeah.
Roosevelt created the UN.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
So
I'm not saying that when I say UN, I'm not blaming UN as.
but,
I'm
but
just saying
they
UN is
created
a.
a system. They created
Yeah.
this organization
Well, UN has
which
failed,
inspires so
right?
much
That's
hope
the
and
point.
trust in the world. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, from inside, it's been hollowed out for
Yeah.
lack of political
Exactly. Yeah.
support.
Yeah. Yeah. UN is a is a group of countries, and
Yeah,
they are at fault. But that is all these players we are talking about.
yeah,
We can blame the US all day long, but at the end of the day, what comes next, you shouldn't let the US dictate the shots, right? I mean, that
yeah.
at the end of the day,
And that
for
may be the
that,
way out. And that
yeah,
is what I was saying, for other countries to stack up and actually, be bigger than the sum total of their parts, and assert their weight. They should already be engaged behind the scenes in terms of what that post US world might look like, because people should move on, and in the larger interests of their own, countries, and countries like theirs. People, there should be leadership, there should be re-emergence of it's
yeah,
the same with what we struggle in India. We know there are issues on the ground, but there's no leadership to represent those issues. People are just benefiting from all the linguistic, color, all kinds of disparities and diversities that exist in this country. So, poverty is not a rallying slogan in this country.
Okay.
No, people rally around religion and Ram and so on, but not around
okay.
justice and poverty, or inequality, or women's rights. They don't do that here.
It was really good to hear
But
your point of view, and all the experience that you have had, and then your analysis of the whole thing has been
oh,
really interesting.
nothing. It was lovely to talk to. I mean, initially you were very, very grim and serious, and I thought, my God, I'm landing myself in the wrong place. You may have all the serious
No, no, no.
journalistic questions.
Me, no, no, no. I was just letting Kanti. This was Kanti's
Yeah,
narrative. I didn't want
but
to
I'm glad
interrupt.
that
Yeah,
we
No,
had a
we do
nice
the freewheeling kind of discussion like this, and
freewheeling.
sometimes we
Yeah.
do take the devil's advocate role also on each other. So
Kanti, if I may just say last thing, I mean, from my side, is to say that people are also a bit fed up of this very expert, specialist kind of an approach to things.
that's why we are all storytellers and not
Exactly.
experts.
Exactly. And that is much better, because I think in that sense we are not invested in any one truth. This whole business of
Exactly.
experts is
Yeah.
very, very
yeah,
loaded.
yeah. No,
So
absolutely.
it has been very useful, Kumar. It has been very useful hearing from you, from your even experience, as well as kind of a broader perspective on these
Yeah,
diplomacy
at least
issues
you
that
guys
we
got to
discussed.
connect after a long time, so that's good.
Thank
That's
you.
also
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
and to many more. And I wish your podcast great success. And I know with Kanti, you have this architect at work who will absolutely make it work, and there's no doubt in my mind.
More than
So
me, it's Raj actually
both
behind
of
the
you, yeah.
scenes.
Yeah.
No, yeah, of course. I
Uh,
am always very
yeah. Thank you so much, though. I hope
thank you.
you have fun at Haldirams and
Thank you, sir. Thank
get
you
all
Thank
very
you,
these
much.
thank you,
things.
And
Kumar. Thank you so
thank you,
much.
my dear.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.